There's 6 things I no longer believe now that I'm 55. I've spent some time on this earth and I've learned a few things. And when you're young, you definitely have a perspective that's more positive, bright, cheery, and you believe you have endless amounts of time. But you know what? Let's take this from the top, because the first thing that I no longer believe at 55 was that health is going to last forever. We know that health isn't here forever, and even when you're young, you probably assume in some degree that health isn't going to last forever. That you picture those old grandparents of yours that were 85 or 80 years old, and you assume that they're in perfect health and life's perfect and grandioso. But the reality is that's just not true. And as you age, and now as I've seen at 55, I've lost so many people, friends, family, relatives, as early as in the 30s, as late as in the 90s. And I've seen all sorts of different people lose their health, lose their lives over a period of time. I myself as well have learned over a course of period of time as well that sometimes there's just things that happen, whether it's serious issues, whether it's chronic problems. Sometimes people, they wind up with things like diabetes, which can be actually controlled, or, chronic health issues or high blood pressure. Many of these conditions can be treated, but some are not. And sometimes there's bad news that there is no way to fix it. And it's unfortunate, as we age, we see more and more of that. We see more relatives, more friends and family, unfortunately, take those turns for the worst. So now at 55, even myself, I've had a few ups and downs. I wound up with hernias a few years ago. I had to get some surgery there and had another couple procedures. And when you're sitting in the operating table and you're about to go under, at that point, then it starts to all resonate and it starts to make sense that, wait a minute, I'm not perfect. I'm not infallible. Or a tooth goes bad and you wind up having to get a root canal. Even as minor as that, it's proof right there that we don't necessarily have perfect health, and there's things that we're going to have to deal with over and over. And as things get older, as we definitely get up there in the years, we start to realize that more and more. We start to see breakdowns in our bodies and our system and our health overall. We see friends and family go through issues, and it becomes more of a stark reality that the health is not there forever. But we've got to take care of our health. I, for one, have definitely taken a step forward, trying to get more active participation in, getting the fitness, eating a little better, a little more carnivore, and just looking after eating less junk and a lot better food. So we've got to take control. But certainly by the time you hit in your 50s, and 55 for me, I'm really starting to see the reality after going through multiple funerals and health issues from friends or even myself. I'm starting to realize that health is not forever. The second one, I have lots of friends, or at least I assumed I did when I was younger. When you're young, and I've spoken about this before, having friends is so important to our network, to our feeling of self and worth, and finding people that think like we do, having somebody to chum up with to go on a bike ride or go to the mall or maybe go watch a movie with. It seems so important to have friends. As we age, we start to see the importance of maybe having a little more alone time, being friends with yourself, soul seeking, and realizing that as you age, everybody develops their own priorities. Everybody develops their own needs, wants. They have families, they have things that they like to do. And unless you're a significant part of that, there's a lot of cases where a lot of these friends start to separate. And it's okay to do that. I mean, I too have had friends years ago, and every once in a while you still reach out or you still chat, and it's fun to chat, but have you ever noticed that it's not quite the same? They've sort of gone on, they've lived their life, they do what they do, and you know what, they clearly have their own perspectives, attitudes, and things change. They go away for 10, 20 years, and then you ring them up or you chat with somebody and you realize that those friends now have different lives. Maybe they have different spouses, they have young ones, they have different perspectives on certain things. The exposure to the news, to press, to life experiences all leads us all in a different direction, and sometimes we start to part ways. So a lot of times friends aren't necessarily friends for life, and as many friends as you thought you had when you were younger, by the time you're my age, 55 and beyond, most of those friends really aren't friends at all. If you're lucky to have 1, 2, maybe 3 good friends, that's absolutely amazing, and count yourself as one of the lucky ones, because that's clearly not one of those scenarios that many people have. I've expressed that as well before about in previous videos, and I'll share that link at the end. I'd like to hear your thoughts as well down below. But I've also shared that a lot of friends we kind of connect with our work. Once we lose work, once we retire, once we quit or get fired, we move. We become the bottom of the totem pole if we move somewhere else or we just retire. And a lot of those people at our jobs, at our works, we assumed were friends. But it's quite interesting how, in fact, once you leave your job, how few friends actually stick around. Think about it. If you've ever retired or ever been fired from a job, how many people actually reach out to you? Maybe initially just because they want a nosy neighbor and find out what actually happened. But in most cases, they just generally don't care. So friends, the really, really good friends are very far and few between. And to say you have lots of friends really just is not accurate. Another thing I'm realizing at 55 is that actually bad things can happen to good people, and we never assume that's the case. You always think that if you're a good person, you're living on the straight and narrow, you're only nice to people, you treat people well with respect and integrity, which we should all live like that anyhow by default. The fact is, life doesn't always treat everybody the same and squarely. And yes, things do go wrong. And it's a very, very sad state of affairs as we age. And, now again, in my 50s, I've seen just about everything happen. I've seen bad people live forever. I've seen good people pass young. And clearly things can happen. It's really a little bit about fate if you believe in fate, but there is a reality. And I truly do believe if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. And it's sad. It's really sad to say, but we almost have to have some faith and trust in, whether you're religious or not. This isn't about religion. This is just really more about your own faith and in reality and the great beyond, somehow in some way that it works out. Life works out. Everything works out the way it should or the way it could. And sadly, it's, when bad things happen to good people, it just is heartbreaking. As a matter of fact, I can honestly say that I know somebody as well, a couple of cases where good people that I knew growing up with, unfortunately, passed at very, very young ages. One very specific person was probably the most positive, the most cheery, the best person, would have nothing bad to say about anybody, wouldn't say shit if their mouth was full of it. And they were the best person you could possibly ever meet. Super positive, just amazing. And unfortunately, they came down with a series of chronic health conditions, followed by losing and passing on in their early 30s. There's nothing good about that to say, other than we have to put faith in. That's kind of, I guess, what the powers wanted us to be and how things were meant to be. But ultimately, it's a sad, sad state when good people, unfortunately, don't have good results. That just happens. That is a reality. And I truly believe that we have to put in that faith, and we have to know that it was meant to be. Sadly, it's just how it is. And we don't know what that time looks like. We don't know if one bad thing happens to somebody. As I mentioned already, previous video about how I was doing regular walks and I walked by a Canadian Tire store, and literally probably a matter of minutes, because going based on the news report, that there was an old 65-year-old gentleman that was attacked, brutally beaten, and sent to the hospital with almost life-threatening injuries. It's sad. But I was walking by there, and if my timing was off a little bit, maybe I was the next person in line at McDonald's and it took me, or Tim's, and it took me a little bit longer to get my coffee, I could have been the person there. I don't know. See, sometimes it's fate, sometimes it was meant to be, but ultimately, sadly, at this age, at 55, sometimes bad things do happen to good people. Another learning at 55 that I really have shifted my mind is that money really does matter. Money does matter. There's an element of that. We need money to survive. And anybody who continues to work into their late 60s are likely prioritizing money above all else. And money's important. We all need it. I mean, without money, we can't buy food. We can't have a house over our head. We can't get around. We can't do anything. So we're sort of landlocked and essentially somehow tied to money in some capacity. But what I've learned over the time, and even making reduced wages now, vastly reduced. I mean, I'm not making the money anymore that I did when I was working. In some way, in some strange, obtuse, odd sort of strange way, I feel better about it now. I'm absolutely okay in making less money for the simple fact that I'm not stressing myself out. My health isn't taking as much of a toll. I'm taking care of myself a little better than when I was working. I'm not eating the fattening foods and the donuts that they would bring around. I'm not going out for those dinner meetings with clients and eating those heavy, fatty meals. I'm not drinking as much alcohol. I'm getting more exercise, and my health is definitely taking a massive improvement. I've taken care of some long needed dental work, and I've looked after some other issues that were long standing. And so what I started to realize is, as you don't have as much money, you start to focus again on priorities. And, going through my life, it gave me a lot of time to reflect about, my parents, and they never had a lot of money. And you know what? They were relatively happy. I mean, everybody has their ups and downs, and sometimes finances in the household, if there's not enough money, that creates stress, and that does create problems. But, if we kind of push forward and we make some of those choices that do help us along the way, maybe we do make those choices that we're having those savings and we're able to retire at a reasonably decent age, it soon becomes a much more clear. Once we're retired, maybe you're not making as much money, and maybe that's conceding. Maybe that's just saying, giving up on the fact that I don't make as much money, therefore I don't need as much money, therefore I'm happier. But it's actually not like that at all. Because now as you get older, you start to think about this a little bit more. How long am I really going to live for? How long am I going to be around for? My health now is worth way more than any amount of money. Because even you hear so many retirees that end up retiring, underspending in their 50s or 60s, and then they wind up ill and they're in their 70s and they wish they could trade all their money off just to have some of their health back. I shared a story like that last week, and that's very, very tragic. But this is a reality. Health is wealth, and no matter how much money you have, if your health isn't there, you can't spend it, you can't use it, and you don't even want it anyhow. What does it really matter if you can buy that yacht if you can't get around, if you can't get out to use it, if you can't enjoy it and exploit it, if you can't travel because you were confined to a wheelchair or you have oxygen bottle, now you can't take those little camping trips and excursions because you're not very mobile. Your health is so important, and I'm starting to realize that more and more as I see more of my relatives. And I'd mentioned last week I went to a funeral, and I'd seen some of the older relatives that I haven't seen in years, and you see them and you think about the fact that I haven't seen a lot of them in 10 or 20 years, and you see them and you have this vision in your mind about what they were like, but now you see them and it's very heartbreaking because now you're seeing them in older, put on a lot more years, and some of them the health is not, and it's clearly not exactly where they would have liked it to be. And it's very, very disheartening because a lot of people, by the time they figure out that health is the most important thing, and they're too busy chasing the ultimate dollar and working that extra 5, 6, 7 years because they need to optimize their retirement plan and need to optimize their pension, they may not be in that perfect health anymore. And I've seen this time and time again. We've already seen the statistics. World Health Organization says HALE, or the healthy average life expectancy, is only in the low 60s now. It's 62, 64, somewhere in there. And that's the age at which people start developing chronic issues that maybe are that boat and anchor that kind of lock you down. And now you're not mobile. And so if you thought you were going to retire at 67, take your big pension and go sail the world, there's a significant possibility that may not be in the cards if your health is not there. So I'm starting to realize more, cut the ties early from corporate game, and study a lot more on my own personal health and try to keep things on the straight and narrow. Another fallacy that I no longer believe is that I plan to live forever. When you're young, you think, oh, I've got this exciting, bold world in front of me. You're 10 years old, you have, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a hockey star, I want to fly to the moon, you want to do all these things, and then you hit your teenage years and then you're just too busy chasing around with friends and you're too busy having fun, and then you hit your 20s and then stark reality, you pop out of school and now you've got to get a job, but then you're not really focusing. At any point you're thinking, I still have this long future ahead of me, I'm still going to live forever, I can do all kinds of things. But as you age, as you start to see a lot of these people start to fall away, and again, I've said this, I've kind of had a few funerals to go to lately, and it almost seems like, when we were meeting at that last one, that there a few of us were chatting and we were saying, it's unfortunate because the only time we really meet is at weddings and funerals. And we haven't seen weddings for a while. There was sort of a rash of those. Then there's a period of time where they're getting older, and now there's a series of funerals. It's very, very sad and disheartening. But that did bring to light that we don't live forever. We don't know what that date is. Maybe I'll live to 95. Maybe I'll live till tonight. I don't know. I'm going to do my best to try to prolong this as much as I can. I'm certainly trying to take my health and get that sorted out. I'm trying to make sure everything, goes and ticks along as well as possible. But there's still some things out of our control. I mean, we have this unreasonable assumption when we're young that we're going to live forever, or maybe we don't assume that. We probably know that we're all going to die eventually, but you never really picture it. It's almost like the health situation. You kind of always assume that the health is going to be good. The health is always going to be there. Same thing. You always believe you're going to live virtually forever. And unfortunately, it just doesn't happen. And as you age, it becomes more and more of a slap in the face, because you are seeing people leave. You are seeing that stark reality that there is a mortality that we can't deny. And so this is exactly how I'm starting to get. At 55, I'm starting to realize, and it's hitting me harder than ever. I mean, we all know, like, even in your 20s, you know that there will be that day, but it just seems so far away, it just doesn't resonate. But lately, and more so lately, of course, with a little more time to sit and stew on it, and when you lose people that are close to you, it really does hit a lot harder to home. And that's exactly where I'm at today. At 55, I no longer believe that I'm going to live forever. I will die. And I will die a lot sooner than later. When you consider the average life expectancy now is around 76 years of age, give or take, where does that leave me? Maybe 20 years. And that's because I retired early. I can't imagine retiring at 67 and giving yourself maybe 5-6 years. Very, very sad. And another reality, something I no longer believe. And unfortunately, I have to say it's a little bit of a lost in trust in society as a whole. I still have a lot of faith that the vast majority of people out there, the mass majority of people out there are good, inherently good people. They mean well. They just want to live their lives. They try to live lives as best as they can. Maybe not the best financial, decisions sometimes, but most people generally, inherently are good people, most. But there are some people that don't necessarily have your best interests. For example, we had a car years ago. We had somebody show up very close to the family. There was a big party at our home. We had a dinner. It was a special event. Next day, we show up. There's a big key mark down the side of our BMW X5. Black car, big white key. I'm like, I look at that and I was shocked. But I just pulled up at home. Our BMW was parked next to me. And I looked over and I saw this big key mark and I thought, what happened there? The first thing that goes to mind was, okay, it's got to be somebody down the neighborhood, maybe, somebody that, maybe there was a beef in traffic and they followed you home, or maybe there's some other issue, or maybe, a prank by some kid down the road. We made all these assumptions that that's what was going on, and that's what probably happened. And we were stressed out, and it was a pretty ugly mark on the car. But you know what? Then we thought, we had this aha moment. And that aha moment was actually, we had video surveillance. And I didn't even think about it at the time. I really didn't. I was too busy sort of surveying and sort of thinking out loud, why would they do that? We haven't had any beef with anybody, and that's just so disheartening. And so my kids were with me, and we're talking about this, and we're all shaking our heads. And then we went and looked at the video footage because we thought, we have video surveillance. So then we went down, we rewound, fast forward, and looked for different events, and went back and narrowed in on that day. Lo and behold, wouldn't you know it? It was one of those people real close to the family. That's right. They walked by and ran their hand along the side of the car. Sad part is, they were one of the least likely people. They're always showing up. They're always smiley, laughing, good personality. And it was actually very, very hard to get our heads around that. And even more importantly, my young ones saw this footage, which we didn't expect to see who we saw on the screen, and they saw it. They actually saw this person who they know, who they trusted. And at that moment, we realized that not all people are good inherently. Most people are good, and it always takes a bad apple to ruin it. But there's a sad reality. And as you age and you experience some of these events and these moments, and sure, it's a car, we'll get over it. It costs us, we didn't take it to insurance because the deductible's $1,000. So for $1,600 it took to repair it, we just repaired it and moved on. It is what it is. It's no big deal. It's a car, it came and went. But it really shatters your trust. And it's unfortunate, but as you age, you start to see a little bit more of that. Now, I don't want this to kind of sound negative because it's not, but it is an eye-opener, and it actually helps you really understand that the world's not perfect. And maybe that person was going through something. Maybe there was an issue. Maybe they were stressed out and they didn't know how to take it out. I'm not here to justify any of that. I would never do that to anybody else. But there is a reality. There is a reality that some people are just not always what they are chalked up to be. Some people are not good or don't have good intentions. Again, I don't want to make this negative because ultimately most people are good, and my outlook on life is generally very, very positive. That being said, it's just one of those situations where it sort of opens your eyes to a certain reality that you never had before. When you were younger, you kind of never saw that. I mean, if there was a road rage incident and you sort of had a situation where there was yelling across through the windows and then they follow you, I mean, things like that make sense, but something like this made no sense. So to see that and to hear something like that when you're younger, it just didn't really make sense. And it still doesn't make sense as you age, other than the fact now it sort of just creates this assumption that not everybody is necessarily good, and taking people at face value can be a little bit of a judgment call. Again, that said, strange day, strange time, but as you age, you certainly get a little wiser, like I've gotten wiser with age. I'd like to hear your thoughts down there. What do you think about any of these? Do you have any of your own personal opinions on what do you think you now care more about or you assume is different than you thought was when you were younger? Like, do you have anything else that maybe I missed? I'd like to hear your thoughts, everybody. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, glorious afternoon, and we'll see you all real soon. Thanks again, everybody.